Welcome to The Reconnect with Carmen LaBerge. We're applying the mind of Christ to the matters of the day so that you can connect the eternal with the everyday and get ready to head out into the world that God so loves in ways that honor Jesus. So let's get started. This is The Reconnect.
Inspiring you to bring God back into the conversation of the day.
This is The Reconnect with Carmen LaBerge on Faith Radio.
If we're gonna fly, we fly like eagles, arms held wide. If we're gonna fear, we fear no evil. We will rise. By your power, we will go. By your spirit, we are bold. If we're gonna stand, we stand as giants. If we're gonna walk, we walk as lions.
Hello, my friend. Let's talk for a moment about grace. When I say the word grace, does a person come to mind? Does a character quality come to mind? Does a song come to mind? Grace. Amazing grace. Maybe saying grace over a meal. Maybe grace as the character quality of a person. What is grace anyway? And how does grace work? And what does grace do when it does its work in us? What is grace? I'm Carmen LaBerge. You're listening to The Reconnect. Welcome. We start our conversation every day by getting ourselves into the Word of God before we get out there into the world that God so loves. We want to immerse ourselves in Scripture. We want to let God speak to us through that which He's already spoken, His living and eternal Word. And so I always ask, where in the Word are you today? And today we're going to be in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 9 and 10. And it is a conversation about grace, because God is responding to Paul, who is pleading that God would remove this thorn, this irritant. We don't really know exactly what it is. Many have conjectured that it is a loss of sight, Paul not being able to see clearly. And I'm wearing glasses right now as I'm talking with you, and Paul would not have had access to something as simple as a pair of reading glasses. So maybe that was the issue. Paul, who loves the Word of God, no longer able to read it, no longer able to maybe see well enough to recognize faces or to focus in on people as he's talking to them in a crowd. You can imagine what a thorn that would have been to a preacher, to a missionary, to a person like Paul. We don't know what the thorn is. We don't know what it is that that Paul is asking God to remove, but it's obviously a constant irritant to him. And Paul's recording here God's response. 2 Corinthians 12, 9 and 10. God responding to Paul, "My grace is all you need. My grace is sufficient. My power works best in your weakness." So Paul says, all right, so that makes me glad to boast about my weaknesses so that the power of Christ can work through me. That's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses and in the insults, hardships, persecutions, and troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong. He doesn't mean that he is personally more physically robust or stronger. The thorn, whatever it is, the irritant and the insults, the hardships, the persecutions, the troubles, they still come. Paul suffers. Paul really suffers, real suffering. But in the midst of all of that, in his weakness, grace is doing its work. Grace is doing its work in Paul, and grace is accomplishing its work through Paul. God's grace is sufficient. God's grace is all you need, Paul. God's grace is all you need. Fill in the blank. Put your name right there. God's grace, God's power, works best in our weakness. So what is grace? And what is grace doing? How does grace work? And what does grace do when it does its work in us? Well, grace is, I'm going to describe it as a place. Grace is the place or the moment where God's love and God's holiness meet. It's this explosive point of intersection. Grace is necessary because sin is real And we cannot, by any means other than grace, have a reconciled relationship with God. God loves us, yes, but God's holiness requires that we who are sinful be kept away. So how are we going to draw near to God? Well, God's going to draw near to us. And so grace is the place at the cross where God's love and God's holiness intersect, where they meet, where grace is revealed, where grace is realized. The cross is where we see grace, and the cross is where, by grace alone, we are saved. You have heard that we are saved by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone. And it is amazing. Grace is amazing. And it is doing its work in us, moment by moment, day by day. And God's grace is sufficient, no matter what your weakness is today, no matter the thorn in your flesh, no matter the challenging circumstances you face. For Paul, insults, hardships, persecutions, troubles, all that he suffered for Christ. In all of that, God's grace was sufficient. Paul talks about being content in the midst of all circumstances. Paul's content because God's grace is sufficient. Because Paul knows the grace of God in Jesus Christ, and he's growing in that grace. Maybe grace is something you say over meals. Well, if so, I just want you to recognize that in saying grace, you are responding to and allowing your life to be transformed by the reality of God's grace in that moment. And that we could say grace over every moment, not just meals. Yes, we say grace with gratitude to God for the provision of food and table and fellowship, but also for life and for breath, grace, all of it, God sufficient in the midst of all of it. Every heartbeat, every breath, every season of life, every circumstance of life. And so today, I want you to consider that God's grace is all you need, no matter what you're experiencing, no matter where you are, physically, emotionally, relationally, financially. God's grace is sufficient, and his power works best in our weakness. Our friend Dave Buehring is going to join us next, and we're going to talk about the grace of God as it works its way out in our lives during every season of life. So it is spring where I live. It is no longer maybe spring in my life. We'll talk about what season we are each in, what that means in terms of our calling. Dave Buehring joins us next here on The Reconnect. Our friend Dave Buehring is back. You can find him at lionshare.org. Hello, Dave.
Good morning. Are you good this morning?
I am. I'm well. How about you?
I am. Just before getting on, I'm running around getting the last bag packed. Cheryl takes me to the airport as soon as we're done here. So I am now really good.
Oh, amen. Amen. Could we ask where you're headed so we can pray for you on your journey?
Yeah, I'm going up to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We are in the process. We started 7 weeks ago between Nashville and Pittsburgh recording our series called A Leadership Journey, something I've done for 22 years, where I'll take anywhere from, it can be 10 to as many as 20 leaders for 6 months and really invest deeply into them. And usually a third of them are spiritual leaders or lead nonprofits or mission organizations or pastors. And the other 2/3 are, arts, media, government, business, science, that kind of thing. And so what we decided to do was record them all so that we have 40, 30-minute sessions. And so after this trip, I'll be done with about 25 of them. So we're well on our way. And we've had 226 people go through this over the last 22 years. And some of them have said, I'd like to take this content into my leadership circles. And so we're looking at a multiplying season beginning later this year.
I love that. I appreciate the not only the investing in individuals, but then giving them a tool and a resource where they can then transmit that content, to another circle of people. That's just awesome. I love that. We'll be praying for your journey and for
Thank you.
and for those recordings. So you have a new podcast series up, and it's called Your Season, Your Calling. And I felt like it might be helpful for us to dip into that today. Could we do that?
Okay, sure.
Yeah. All right. So I have heard you talk about this content on other occasions, this seasons of life kind of conversation. So can you maybe give us a little bit of an overview of the subject?
Yeah, sure. So for me personally, 1997, there was a man by the name of Bobby Clinton, and I was able to participate in a Monday to Friday training that he did. That was very insightful for me. Carmen, we walk into the room, probably 50 to 60 of us, and I noticed he had three rows, like straight across, behind each other. And so that's where we were sitting when he walked in. He kindly greeted us, and then he made this statement. He said, "In my research, over 18 years of spiritual leaders from scripture, church history, and today, I have found that only 1 in 3 finishes their life well."
Mm.
He had our attention, and he began then over the next 4 or 5 days to tell us what he had found in his research and how to pay attention to what are the barriers to finishing well. What does finishing well look like? And what are enhancements to finishing well? And one of those 5 enhancements was, he called it perspective. And it's having a lifelong perspective of how God develops you. And so from that content, and with Bobby's permission, Bobby Clinton is the name of the gentleman who did this, we've kind of laid out these 5 different seasons and what they look like, and what are things, for example, you should be paying attention to in each season so you can better cooperate with God.
So, do you want to just start with the foundational one?
Sure, sure. Well, if you want, I can just give you kind of a quick scan of all of them so you see the
Oh, that'd be
context of it.
awesome.
And then
Yeah, great.
yeah. So what Bobby refers to as a generalized timeline, which means, it's general ballpark here. And when you actually do it for yourself, you see, okay, mine is just a little different here, but generally this pattern is the same, and these ages are kind of right in there. So he starts the first one, he calls it Sovereign Foundations. And this is from when you're born till about the first time that you're on your own, like you're not dependent on parents for housing and income. For me, it was 18, jumping on a plane in Minneapolis, St. Paul, flying to Kona, Hawaii to join Youth with a Mission. And I never lived at home again. For others, where mom and dad were gracious and said, "Hey, just live at home. You don't need to be paying those college, housing costs and all that. Just stay here." And so for you, it might be 22, 23, 24. But in that season, there's certain things that God does, and we can come back to that because that's where you wanted to start. Then the second one is usually your 20s and 30s. And this is a season where there's 2 primary things that go on. One is God is really focusing on whether you're throwing touchdown passes in the NFL, planting a business in Omaha, being a stay-at-home mom in Jamaica. Regardless of what you're doing, God is after building character in you. And this is why it's so important that our young adult friends get this, because that's not something that's focused on these days. But in light of the long haul, God's building character in you. And the second thing is you get glimpses of your calling. There's moments you go, "Oh, I wish I could do that every day," but we're not quite ready for it. But it's the Lord's encouragement to us that we see that.
Mm.
You move to the third phase, which is more your 40s and 50s. And in this phase, you find there's unique methodologies. And what he means by that is you realize, when I use my gifts in this kind of way with these kinds of folks as my, whether it's audience, clients, congregation, whatever it is, stuff happens. Like there's good fruit that happens. And there's a connecting of how God likes to pour his life through you. And the closer you get to your 50s, the clarity of call comes. In other words, it might be, well, I know I'm called to business, but after doing business now for, say, 25 years, you realize, I think I'm an entrepreneur and I really need to lean into this. Fourth season is your stride season. It's where you really hit your stride, and it's usually mid to late 50s and through your 60s, sometimes even peeking into the 70s. But it's where you hit your stride. And Bobby says you're put in a major role, and it may have a title, it may not have a title, but people can tell when you're in your major role because there's a little extra heft there to it. And then you hit, he calls it convergence. And if you could make it a math equation, it's the converging of all the pieces of your life. It would be season tested character plus a mature understanding and usage of your gifts, plus a God determined sphere of influence. And when you hit that thing, it is you're in your stride and there's favor and there's moving forward. You're advancing the kingdom. You're serving people like never before. And the final phase is afterglow. So if the fourth season is your maximized impact when it comes to kind of giftedness and all that, your 70s plus afterglow is meant to be your most impactful influence time, where you're letting go of responsibility so you have more time to invest in the 60s, 50s, 40s, 30s, 20s, et cetera. So that's kind of the span of it.
Okay, I first of all, I love that it spans all of life. It's not like, well, here's really when you're, doing the thing and the rest of it's, just kind of concentric circles. No. There's a laser focus to this. It's intentional. It grows over time, and you arrive at the finish line, so to speak, and you finish well. Like it's not even like you fall off a cliff at some point in terms of this. There's meant to be impactful influence all the way up to the end. And I appreciate that part of it as well.
Yeah, me as well. And it's again, it's a little bit kind of fear of the Lordish, I guess I could say. When you go back to what I said at the beginning, he found only 1 in 3 finish well. So there are rabbit trails along the way where we can get caught into this. And the reality is, when you're walking in obedience, Jesus will move through your life to touch others. But are you paying attention, particularly in these younger phases of your life, to what he's building inside of you?
It's so good. All right, let's take a brief break. When we come back, let's wind back the clock and let's focus in on those sovereign foundations, like from the time that you're born until you're out there on your own. We are talking with our friend Dave Buehring from Lion Share. He's got a series of conversations. It's a new podcast series, Your Season, Your Calling. We'd love to send you a direct link to that podcast series. We'll do that on the text line, 877-933-2484. You can also find it at lionshare.org/podcast. And then on the list, you're looking for Your Season, Your Calling. Next, we're going to talk about the very first of those in that series. It's called Sovereign Foundations. What are those foundations, those foundational things that we need to be focused on in terms of discipleship? And obviously, this is a look back for most of us, but for some of you, you are sowing into the lives of those who are still in your home, not yet out there on their own. So what does that look like to be building those sovereign foundations? That's up next here on The Reconnect. Just take the first step. Just take the first step. I mean, every journey begins with a first step, right? And if you want to hike to the top of a mountain, or if you just want to, make it around the block, it all starts with a first step. Just take one step, a step out the door. Now, the same holds true in the journey of discipleship with Jesus. A relationship with Jesus actually begins with a first step. Sometimes taking that first step can be really hard, right? Well, if you've got questions about what it means to begin a relationship with Jesus, just take the first step. Text the word faith to 41224. Our friends at the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association are going to hold your hand as you take the first step or the next step in your walk of faith with Jesus. They're going to help you walk with him and talk with him. Take the first step of faith today. Text the word faith to 41224. For me, it is still one kid at home, one kid in the middle of college. I still think we are definitely in the sovereign foundation stage of their lives, but also now the grandkid stage, niece and nephew stage, where they're still in those formative years. Our friend Dave Buehring is here from Lion Share. We're dipping into the first in the series of conversations about Your Season, Your Calling. Dave, let's talk about sovereign foundations.
Yeah, it's called that because usually, as a kid, like we were just yesterday with our 11-year-old grandson and 8-year-old granddaughter, and he had his flag football game. And so we're hanging with family and just doing that. And when you're that age, you're not thinking about this kind of stuff. But it's sovereign foundations because regardless of it being unbeknownst to us, God is still actively working on our behalf from the very beginning of our life. And some of the sovereign foundation dynamic has to do with things like you didn't choose your eye color, you didn't choose the family you grew up in, the neighbors around you, the schools you went to. But here's the thing that's really interesting for those that are listening today: the older you get, the more you can look back and realize, oh, okay, I see what God did there. Like whether it was a very difficult situation and God redeemed that in your own heart, and now you're pouring out to people who maybe have struggled with the same thing. Or like one of the practical things for me, Carmen, is I lived from kindergarten through high school. I lived in 9 different locations and 4 or 5 cities, but 9 different homes. And I realized later here in life, probably in my 50s, like, oh, the Lord built in flexibility into my life in light of being in various settings, denominations, vocations in the nations, so that when I'm in those settings, there's not, the raging insecurity of, oh no, what's going to happen? Or how am I going to, or having the need to control it. Is just knowing how to go with the flow. And, that was something God built in there in light of what he was going to call me to do later. So part of sovereign foundations are those kinds of things.
And so sometimes we obsess about, we've got to control the environment that our kids are in. We've got to make sure that they are in the best schools, and we got to make sure that they are, doing, X, Y, Z. We got to, and really some of us need to settle into, this is God's kid. I get to be a steward of their life for a period of time. But I'm gonna trust that God is not only working into their life what they need for the future filled with hope that he has planned for them, but that part of what God's doing in their life is building the resilience he knows they're going to need. And if I never allow them to face any difficulty, if I protect them from everything and prepare them for nothing, right, if I expect that everything for my kid or my grandkid is going to be perfect, I actually may be getting in God's way in terms of building what he knows they need for the future.
100%. And
Yeah.
and in this phase, it's kind of sovereign foundation. So there's foundational things that you want to think about in investing in your child or your grandchild. Things, for example, like love, like just the basics of like, do they know how to receive love and affirmation and encouragement, and do they know how to give it? Is it being built into the core of their character, that they know how to choose somebody else's highest good, and that they know how to be say situationally aware in their relationships. They don't just use people for their purposes, but they love people. I think obedience, is another piece. It's like obeying our parents tends to be the starting place, and it's meant to be done out of love, and its intention is to grow us in the right direction, right? And it's also meant to help us learn how to trust good authority figures in our life, because we all want our own way. I mean, just think about the 2 to 3 year old, that we all see throwing a fit at the store because on the checkout line, mommy won't pull the thing off the shelf to get them, right? And I love that it says that Jesus learned obedience in Hebrews. So it's something, we can learn. So that's something. Truthfulness, helping your child understand the value of truth and humility and honesty. Responsibility is another one. Like I remember when I was 18, 19 years old, and I had a spiritual leader say, Dave, maturity doesn't come because you're growing taller and growing more muscles. Maturity comes through responsibility. And so it's helping our kids and our grandkids learn how to pay attention to that. And so that that character piece is really important. And the other thing, Carmen, I'll just throw in here is it's important to pay attention to the life purpose moments. And when you look back, like for your age and my age, when you look back, you're going to see them there. Like my dad working at KTIS radio in Minneapolis while he went back to Bible college. And he invites me when he's doing the light and the night show on a Friday night to come with him into the studio. That began the interest for me as like a 13-year-old in communication. Or when our family's in Hawaii as a 16-year-old and there's some discipleship training my dad is walking through, and he introduces me to Lauren Cunningham, the founder of Youth of the Mission, who becomes the primary mentor discipler of my life. Well, those are things when you look back, Now you can kind of connect the dots. So with younger ones, it's helping them pay attention to recognize this is a valuable moment.
We had an interview a couple of weeks ago now with Jason Hammerberg, and he brought his son into the studio with him for that recording of that interview. And I was thinking to myself, like, you never know what the seeds are that are, the seeds that are
Hmm.
being planted in the life of a young person. You don't really
Hmm.
know what intention
Yeah.
God has for them in the future, and how those conversations, particularly in a work environment, like, I don't think kids
Yeah.
are sufficiently exposed to a really broad range of work environments. I mean, when
Hmm.
I was a kid, you had to go to work with your parents when you were off school, because there was no, I mean, I don't know what other people were doing, but like, I went to work with my mom. Like, that's what I did. And so um I was exposed to at least her work environment. I remember going to work with my dad. And that wasn't because there was like some special take your kid to work day. It was because there wasn't another option. And so, you're
Yeah.
going to sit quietly at the end of the desk and do something while your parent is
Yeah.
doing what they're doing. And I think about, we have this like strange expectation that somehow people coming out of college, they're going to know what they want to do, and because they don't even have any idea, like, the millions of jobs that are available. They haven't been in enough different work environments to see some of that. So I think exposure, like you're describing, exposure to things lights a fire. It opens that idea well. Um, I think there are just so many things that we could be doing to expose our kids to so much more, as opposed to like isolation and protectionism, which feels like tends to be the trend among Christians right now.
Yeah. And I do think there's an important piece in this of not that it may land, fully, but recognizing giftedness, skills, spiritual gifts, abilities, starting to recognize those things. And it's connecting that with things they're passionate about. Now, some of our passions are meant just to be refueling refreshment things. Like, I love sports, but I knew I wasn't going to be a professional athlete. But those things still refuel and refresh me. But then there are certain things that you connect to that have to do with your calling. And so I think helping our kids and grandkids go, do you know you're really good at that? And notice when you did this, and it kind of helps awaken something there.
That's so good. I like the awakening language, and that's all so good. Dave, we love spending time with you. Thank you so much for this refreshment. Blessings upon your travels and your recordings, and we'll talk to you next time.
Sounds good. Have a good day.
So wonderful. We'd love to send you the direct link to this series of podcasts. It's called Your Season, Your Calling. You can find it at lionshare.org, but we'll send you the direct link on the text line, 877-933-2484. Maybe this is going to lead you to a little time of reflection today and over the course of the next several days about what God was working into your life when you were a kid, when you were a young person. What are some of those experiences that maybe you've not thought about for a really, really, really long time, where God was actively working, unbeknownst to us, right? When we were young people, not experiences that we would have chosen necessarily, but things that God used in the course of our life to really make us who we are today. There's just no question that I could now rehearse a number of things, people, experiences, tragedies that were a part of my life, particularly in my middle school, high school, and then college years. So, yeah, I mean, you become who you are, right? We're going to continue the conversation with Dave over the course of his next several visits. So don't worry, we'll circle back around to the other seasons of life as well. It's Monday. So next up, we're going to dip into the Monday mailbag. What did you see? What did you hear? What did you read? What do you think? Those are how most of the questions directed to me start. So that's up next here on the Reconnect. Hey, a good observation here on the text line from Terry, that sometimes it sounds like we're assuming that every kid is college bound. That is certainly not true. And In my own family, that's not true. I mean, for those of you that listen for any length of time, I mean, you know that my son Matthew is a person with some very individualized characteristics. I mean, other people would call it special needs. I wouldn't describe him that way. I mean, other than every kid is a special needs kid. And so Matthew works, and Matthew works here on the farm. Matthew works at a grocery store, and he continues to develop and grow. He's 20, and I don't know what God's going to fully do in and through him, but he's a joy and a delight and a challenge, and a part of our family and a part of this community. And then we've got some of our young adult kids who went to college, but and to the military, to serve our country and to serve for the cause of freedom around the world. And following those experiences are not in jobs that are white collar. They are in still what I would describe as very labor intensive jobs. And so, yeah, I don't know all that God is going to do in the lives of your kids or my grandkids. I have a profoundly autistic granddaughter. Going to school a couple hours a day is a struggle. And then figuring out how we as a family manage that. And what do we do on Sundays? The whole thing around the development of the life of a child is complex. And so, Terry, thank you for the reminder that we don't know. God is working actively in the lives of children and young adults in ways that are unbeknownst to us. Some of them he's going to call to the mission field. I remember a conversation that I had with a wonderful saint who's now with the Lord. His name's John Boone. And John and his wife had raised their children, and their children were raising their grandchildren, in the Lord, with a wonderful evangelistic approach to giving. And then he was stunned and dismayed and a bit put off when his granddaughter and the young man that she married felt called to the mission field in Central America. And he's like, no, that's not. And I'm like, John, this is what you raised. This is how you raised them. And he doesn't want his great grandchildren growing up in Central America in danger and, without the privileged schools that he had worked so hard to make sure that generationally his people would have. And I had to laugh. Like, this is how God works. I had another friend who was surprised when, his daughter, who they'd raised in the church and they'd, sent off to all kinds of wonderful missionary experiences as a teenager and then in college. And then she learned Arabic and she moved to the Middle East and she married a person. Like, jaw dropping. Like, what? But I want my grandbabies right here at home. Yes, this is not, God's concern is global, and God's actively working in the lives of our kids. And when we sow into them the heart of the gospel, they may go. I mean, there's not a record of how would have been Saul's parents felt about the whole exercise, right, of all of his missionary journeys. But aren't you glad that God got a hold of his heart and changed his life, spoke through him? Character development. What are we doing in the lives of our children and grandchildren? How are we recognizing that God is growing them up in every way into Christ? I just think those sovereign foundations conversations are so important. All right, we're supposed to be doing Monday mailbag, so let's jump in. I get so many just like quick little notes like, did you see this? Did you hear this? Did you read this? What do you think about this? And so let's just run through some really quick ones and then do one that's a little bit longer. So yes, I did see that the Artemis 2 splashed down. Actually, I think Artemis 2 is the mission. I think Orion is the capsule. Splashed down safely, right on the mark, just off of the California coast. If you've not seen it, it's everywhere out there, not hard to find video. If you happen to be live in the stadium at the Mets game, they ran it for, a period of minutes on the big screen of the Jumbotron. They just suspended play to watch the landing, safely returning home. This is, again, always a great opportunity to talk about home, to talk about the earth, talk about this very small planet that we live on and just how perfectly positioned it has to be. They talk about the Goldilocks zone. They talk about just absolutely right where we have to be with all of the circumstances that have to be true in order for life to exist on this earth, and human life in particular. And all of that gives us an opportunity to point to the Creator, to the glory of God. I want you to pay attention to Victor Glover, the flight commander, committed Christian brother. He's already begun what he is, casually calling his good news tour. He used the reunion photo with his family on social media as an opportunity to say out loud, well, time to share the good news. Now, he's going to have opportunities to share the good news in all kinds of spaces and ways, and I want you to pray for him, Victor Glover. I want you to watch for the things that he's doing out there and fan the flame of that. I think it's a great opportunity to talk about the sun and the moon and the stars and the universe and everything in it and who made it all. It's an opportunity to, to inspire young people or fan the flame of their inspiration. All right, yes. Did I see that Rory McIlroy won the Masters? I did. I took note of it. I didn't actually see it. I took note of it. And I think it's an opportunity to talk about excellence and to talk about endurance and to talk about people of faith in all kinds of vocations. And it's an opportunity to talk about diligence and preparation and hard work and the way that you can restore your own sense of peace in the midst of it. He talks about like walking from one hole where he didn't feel like he did very well, right? Probably got a bogey. And before he gets to the next tee, he has to have a conversation with himself about who he is and what he knows how to do. And sometimes during the day-to-day, you might need to have one of those little moments of reset. It might not be as obvious that you're walking from, the green of one hole to the tee of the next, but maybe that emotional regulation, that process of being like, okay, I actually know who I am. I'm going to leave that last encounter or that last project or whatever it is. I'm going to leave that behind. And I'm going to intentionally walk to the next thing. And I'm going to intentionally walk step by step with the Lord to the next thing. And I'm going to recognize that I belong to Him. I'm not going to pick up offenses. I'm going to leave those behind. I'm going to have a little emotional reset right now before, I have to tee off on whatever the next thing is. And without being teed off. Play on words. You can play with your words today. That's okay. Did I see that President Trump announced yesterday that the U.S. Navy will immediately begin blocking off any and all shipping that is trying to enter or leave the Strait of Hormuz? Yes, I did see that. That blockade began after 21 hours of failed negotiations between the United States and Iran. Hats off to the vice president who just sought to bring an end to a war that from the beginning he has not supported. The sticking points in that failed negotiation, Iran has refused to abandon its nuclear ambitions. And the two sides were unable to find a framework for peace that included allies in the region. And they disagreed on a plan to reopen the Strait of Hormuz because, the U.S. is demanding that Iran do that without tolls, without requiring each tanker to pay something like $2 million to pass through. So Vice President J.D. Vance said of the process, it seems as if the Iranian officials misunderstand their lack of leverage. And the other side saying that the U.S. demands are excessive and unlawful. So in anticipation of the United States taking control of the Strait of Hormuz, 2 U.S. warships served as basically minesweepers on Saturday clearing a, quote, new and safe pathway for oil tankers through the Strait of Hormuz. These ships also destroyed an Iranian surveillance drone, which Iran called a possible ceasefire violation. Everybody's looking for reason to point fingers at the other for sure if the ceasefire doesn't hold. The president has said that the blockade will be enforced impartially against vessels of all nations entering or departing Iranian ports and coastal areas. And I think that's important. And it's also important to note that the United States, this is via CENTCOM, Central Command, CENTCOM forces will not impede freedom of navigation of vessels that are transiting the Strait of Hormuz to and from non-Iranian ports. So, although you're going to hear the word blockade today being used, I think that we should characterize this as the United States taking control of passage through the Strait of Hormuz. Yes, anything coming out of an Iranian port is going to be blocked, or a port that Iran is actually using anywhere in the Arabian Gulf or the Gulf of Oman. Like it's not, the blockade is significant. But this is also about making sure that oil tankers can transit the strait and those that are carrying fertilizer supplies. And so all of that is going on, and you'll need to know that today. We will continue our conversation about questions that people ask. I recently got a question. Hey, Carmen, what do you make of the news that Americans are having fewer and fewer babies? And how can I encourage my young adult children to start having kids? They're all in their 30s and only one of them is married. And I don't think I'm ever going to have grandkids, and it makes me sad. All right. Yeah. Let's talk about U.S. fertility rates next. You're listening to The Reconnect. All right. So you've got a pack of cards. You've heard of a pack of wolves. Maybe you have a backpack. You got a lot of packs in your life. But have you ever gotten a Faith Radio welcome pack? I mean, you might be brand new to Faith Radio, or you might just be new-ish, but either way, if you've never gotten a welcome pack, we'd like to welcome you. So text the word welcome to 877-933-2484 or visit myfaithradio.com and request your very own welcome pack today. Okay, yes, I am watching the time. For those of you that are asking, and no, I don't have time to talk at length about U.S. fertility rates. We will circle back around to that in another conversation. But let me just, I'll just summarize it this way. Yes, I'm paying attention. The U.S. fertility rate dropped to a historic low in 2025. Less than 3.6 million babies born, which is a 1% decline from 2024. And we touched on this at the end of last week, but I recognize that, some of us want to talk more about it because we'd like to influence it. We would like our children to be having for us grandchildren. I get that. I totally get that. And if you talk to them, what do most of them say? Most of them say it's too expensive. It's just too expensive. In fact, 43% of adults who are not choosing to have children point to finances as the reason. Now, I do want you to ask yourself, would you have ever had a baby if it was about money? Susie Larson is probably the best person to bear witness and testimony on this fact. Like she and Kev, she talks about this all the time. She and Kev, they could not afford children. There's no way. I mean, if you had put it to like the financial question, like no, there's no way. And there was a lot of need and want along the way. But she's so glad she had all of them. And so for those of you who have had the privilege of bearing children into the world, yeah, I realize it's a stressful headache and a mess, right? But aren't you glad you had them? Of course you are. I mean, even if right now you're estranged from them, you're praying for them. Even if right now they're causing you grief, you're praying for them. You don't regret having brought a child into the world. And so I do want us to consider the joy of children, and I want us to consider the creation mandate to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. And you may say, well, the earth is full enough. Okay. Not with people who are going to raise their children in the fear and admonition of the Lord. Like it's incumbent upon us as Christians to be fruitful and multiply, to trust that God is going to conceive of the people who he wants to have in the world, and then for us to bear them. And there's a reason we call it bearing them, because it is a burden. And I recognize that. Too expensive is a real argument, but it's also a rationalization. And there's something to be said for the fact that countries and communities with the highest incomes do not have the highest birth rates. So obviously, and in many cases, they have the lowest birth rates. So those cultural voices that are talking about it being too expensive, it's just really not it doesn't work itself out. So I just want you to preach the good news of biblical anthropology, right? God is the God of life, and God is the God of babies, and God's the one who knits babies together in their mother's wombs. And so let God work out his grace in your family, and have real conversations. Have real conversations about trusting God to conceive of, to bring into the world, and yes, then to provide for in his own sufficient measure for their lives and their livelihoods, and for them to be the people who he is creating and calling them to be. We've got another hour together next. It's going to be really wonderful to reconnect with Elizabeth Newman. She's a security analyst. She's a former agent of the Department of Homeland Security. It'd be really good to reconnect with her about things that are going on in the world and get her perspective on those things. And then James Barnett is going to join us, and we're going to revisit what is happening with The Chosen. The Chosen is breaking records globally. The Chosen is, it's a show, right? It's a series, and you probably experience it in English. But The Chosen is being translated by the Come and See Foundation into languages all over the world, so that people of every language can experience the gospel in a way that, well, they can receive and understand. It's one thing to have something translated at the bottom, like scrolling with the, in English subtitles. It's another thing to actually hear it, to hear the words, to hear it in your heart language. And so I'm just so thankful for the Come and See Foundation and what they're doing. And so we'll highlight their work at the end of the next hour. So stay tuned. We've got another hour together up next. You're listening to The Reconnect. Thanks for listening to The Reconnect with Carmen LaBerge. Let us know how we can help you more fully reconnect the eternal with the everyday. We want to walk with you throughout your journey of discipleship, so let's connect. You can text us at 877-933-2484 or connect with us online at myfaithradio.com and on all our social media. I look forward to connecting with you as we each seek to reconnect the eternal with the everyday.